Rousseff was raised in an upper-middle-class household. Her father was a lawyer who immigrated to Brazil from Bulgaria, and her mother was a teacher. In 1964 Brazil's president was overthrown by a coalition of civilian and military officials, and the teenaged Rousseff became involved in the left-wing opposition to the government. She was associated with the militant group National Liberation Command, Comando de Libertação Nacional, Colina, and she married fellow activist Claudio Galino Linhers in 1968. After a raid on a Colina safe house resulted in police fatalities, the pair went into hiding in Rio de Janeiro. She and Galino later fled Rio de Janeiro for Porto Alegre, subsequently separated, and in 1981 divorced. Rousseff moved to São Paulo, and it was there in 1970 that she was arrested by government forces. She was imprisoned for 3 years on the charge of subversion and during that time was subjected to torture by her captors. Upon her release in 1973, Rousseff resumed her education. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics from the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre in 1977. As the grip of the dictatorship weakened, Rousseff became active in local politics, and she was appointed finance secretary for Porto Alegre in 1986. She left that position in 1988 and later spent 2 years as president of the Foundation of Economics and Statistics of Rio Grande do Sul State, 1991–93. She returned to government work in 1993 as Secretary of Mines, Energy, and Communications for Rio Grande do Sul, and she was credited with increasing energy efficiency and power production within the state. Rousseff left that post in 1994 and later pursued a PhD in economics. Before receiving the degree, however, she was called back to her former government post in 1999, and it was there that she became affiliated with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's Workers' Party, Partido dos Trabalhadores, PT. Her standing in the party quickly rose, and she left her government job in 2002 to serve on the staff of Lula's successful presidential campaign. Upon taking office in 2003, Lula appointed Rousseff Minister of Mines and Energy, and she was named chair of the Brazilian state-run oil concern Petrobras. Rousseff emphasized the need for Petrobras to expand its production capacity, and in 2005 Lula appointed her his chief of staff. An expanding economy and a shrinking poverty rate boosted Lula's popularity, but he faced a constitutional limit of 2 terms, so he began grooming Rousseff to be his successor. She stepped down from Petrobras in March 2010 to prepare for her presidential campaign. In the first round of voting, in early October, Rousseff failed to capture the 50% of votes needed to avoid a runoff. In the second round, held later that month, she won a commanding victory, capturing some 56% of votes. She was sworn into office on January 1, 2011. On October 31, 2010, the 62-year-old Rousseff of the Workers' Party defeated Social Democratic Party candidate José Serra in the second round of Brazil's presidential elections. Rousseff grabbed hold of the Brazilian presidency with 55.4% of the votes in the runoff versus 44.6% for Serra, after winning 46.6% versus 33% in the first round. Dilma has thus become the first woman to be president of Brazil, the 5th largest country and the 8th largest economy in the world. She won the presidential elections primarily thanks to the votes of the poorer and middle classes, and the overwhelmingly strong promotion by outgoing President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Rousseff, who had never held an elected office before, has herself acknowledged this fact. The 2 Lula cabinets, in which she took part, lifted 21 million people out of poverty and created 15 million jobs since 2003. Initially, José Serra, the opposition candidate, led the race until about July 2010 because he was better known by the Brazilian public. He was a very popular, successful man, Minister of Health, Governor of the state of São Paulo, Mayor of São Paulo. Dilma Rousseff at that time was chief of staff for the president, but she had not been a very well-known person nationally. Once people started to identify her as President Lula's candidate, she started going up in the polls. She ran as the candidate for continuity. Brazilians want continuity, explains Professor Paulo Sotero, director of the Brazil Institute of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Washington, D.C. He points out that major issues that Dilma faced during the campaign, her stand on abortion and allegations of corruption by other members of the Lula cabinet, did not really hold her back. José Serra had a very long track record of public service as senator, minister, mayor, and governor. He also ran against Lula in 2002. That is why he was leading the polls until the first months of 2010. Dilma Rousseff, in turn, was relatively unknown, a technocrat from Lula's administration. Dilma's lead was a direct function of Lula's popularity. She was offered a cabinet post in Lula's administration, energy, as a result of Lula's coalition with smaller left-wing parties. As a candidate, she learned a lot along the way, but greatly benefited from Lula's direct help, says intern João Augusto de Castro Neves, a US-based Brazilian political analyst, CAC Political Consultancy. I think that the Lula government was somehow lucky to benefit from a long-running process of transformation of the Brazilian economic situation since the early 1980s. I wouldn't speak of a Lula phenomenon outside this big picture, comments economist André Urani, executive director of the Institute for Studies on Work and Society in Rio de Janeiro. All three analysts are highly critical of the quality of debate in Brazil's election campaign in the fall of 2010, which they think has failed to meet expectations about the country's needs. None of the final candidates, neither Dilma, nor Serra, represented a new agenda. Both have somehow been shaped by the ideas of development that have prevailed in the second half of the last century, thinks Urani. Overall, the election was very poor when it came to the debates on ideas and issues, says Neves in turn. This, however, does not make the fact of Dilma's election less impressive, especially as far as Bulgarians' views of her rise are concerned. From Joan of Arc of Subversion to President. Dilma Vana Rousseff was born on December 14, 1947, in Belo Horizonte, in the family of Bulgarian immigrant Petar Rousseff, 1900 to 1962, aka Pedro Rousseff, a lawyer and construction entrepreneur, and Dilma Jane Silva, a school teacher whose parents were ranchers. Her sister Ana Lucia died in 1977 at the age of 26. Dilma's brother Igor Rousseff is a lawyer. Dilma's life was deeply affected by the military regime which ruled Brazil from 1964 till 1985, after the 1964 coup d'état against the democratically elected government of left-wing President João Goulart. Dilma's Bulgarian father, Petar Rousseff, died in 1962 when she was 15. Over the next couple of decades she participated in organized resistance of leftist and Marxist groups. In 1968, she married her first husband C.L. Udio Galino Linhers, a brother-in-arms. She studied economics at the Minas Gerais Federal University Economics School, where she met her second husband Carlos Franklin Peixeo de Araújo, a leftist lawyer. Dilma emerged as a leading figure in VAR Palmers, a political military organization of Marxist-Leninist partisan orientation. The attorney who prosecuted the organization called her Joan of Arc of Subversion. She was the mastermind of a robbery of $2.5 million from a former governor of São Paulo to be used for funding leftist resistance activities. However, she was captured in January 1970, and was tortured for 22 days, and kept in prison for 3 years. She was released in 1972, when she moved to Porto Alegre. In 1977, Dilma graduated with a degree in economics from the Rio Grande do Sul Federal University. In March 1976, she gave birth to her only child, daughter Paula Rousseff Araújo. In 1990, she became part of the government of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, rising to Secretary of Energy and Communication in 1993, serving on and off in the state government in the 1990s. In 2003, Brazil's President Lula surprisingly chose Dilma for Minister of Energy. She became most famous for implementing a program called Electricity for All, designed to bring electric power to households of Brazil's underdeveloped and remote regions, and was later picked to be his chief of staff. In 2009, she suffered from cancer in the lymphatic system, from which she recovered. On September 9, 2010, Paula Rousseff de Araújo, her only daughter, gave birth to Dilma's first grandchild, a boy named Gabriel Rousseff Covallo. Dilma has become the first female head of government in the history of Brazil, and the first de facto female head of state since the death of Maria I, Queen of the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves in 1816. While this woman seems to be on her way of yet facing even greater challenges in her life, in her capacity as president of one of the most important countries globally, one can't help but noticing that her fate so far has been quite remarkable. And so is the fate of her Bulgarian family. Dilma Rousseff's Bulgarianness and Bulgarian origins. Dilma Vana Rousseff's father, Petr Stefanov Rousseff, known in Brazil as Pedro Rousseff, was born in 1900 in Gabrovo in central Bulgaria. He moved to Sofia to study law but later began trading in textiles. In 1929, he left his wife Evdokia Yankova in her last month of pregnancy, and went to France. His wife and son Lyuban Kamen Rousseff did not hear from him for 18 years. His departure from Bulgaria remains shrouded in mystery, while his Bulgarian son Lyuban Kamen claimed his father left because his business went bankrupt. Petr Rousseff most likely departed from Bulgaria for political reasons, as he was connected with the leftist and communist movement in Bulgaria in 1920s. After a right-wing coup in 1923, the political situation in Bulgaria in the 1920s was especially tense, with the government persecuting the communists and other leftists in the so-called White Terror, while the communists responded with sabotages and armed rebellions, most notably in 1923, in the so-called Red Terror, which culminated in 1925 in the largest terrorist attack in Bulgarian history, the blowing up of the St. Nedelya Cathedral that killed 134 people. Even though the late 1920s are today seen as a time of relative political calm in Bulgaria politically, the landscape was hardly safe for anybody of far-left orientation, so leaving the country as a political migrant might have made much sense. Petr Rousseff lived in France for 15 years, heading to Argentina in 1944, and shortly after that to Brazil. One important fact about Petr Rousseff is that he was very close with Nobel Prize-nominated Bulgarian poetess Elisaveta Bagriana, 1893–1991, who he met in France in the 1930s. Bagriana, a Bulgarian literary icon regardless the political regime and the greatest Bulgarian poetess of all time, dedicated several poems to him in her Brazilian cycle, written in 1960–1963. She visited Rousseff's mansion in Brazil in 1960, meeting his wife and kids, including the 13-year-old Dilma Vana, right after she attended the meeting of the International Pen Club in Rio de Janeiro. For a non-Bulgarian it might be hard to understand what it meant to be close with Bagriana. In the popular culture of the 21st century it would probably equal being best friends with a dozen of the top Hollywood actresses. It is probably safe to say that Bagriana's weight in Bulgarian literature and society was greater than the importance of all poetesses in the English language literature combined. The exact nature of the relationship between Bagriana and Petr Rousseff remains unclear. It might have well been more than just friendship. In any case, friendship, or more than friendship, Petr Rousseff must have been a rather intriguing and talented person to have deserved to be on such close terms with the greatest Bulgarian poetess of all time. Dilma's Bulgarian half-brother Lyuban Kamen Rousseff, 1930–2008, never met his father and his Brazilian siblings. He did make a career in Bulgaria as an engineer constructing large water dams. However, he had constant problems with the Bulgarian communist regime, having participated briefly in an opposition formation in 1947. The opposition formation was a Social Democratic Youth Union, part of the Social Democratic Party, which a year later was swallowed by the Bulgarian Communist Party, the Soviet-orchestrated formation that established a totalitarian dictatorship in 1948 to 1989. Bulgarian journalist Momchil Inzhov has observed that both Dilma Rousseff and her Bulgarian half-brother Lyuban Kamen Rousseff, both of leftist views, had been in trouble with the respective political regimes in their country. The difference was that Dilma was prosecuted for her leftist and communist views by a right-wing military dictatorship in Brazil, while Lyuban Kamen was in trouble for his leftist views with a communist regime in Bulgaria, a paradox that only serves to show how little sense the Marxist-Leninist indoctrination of the Bulgarian Communist Party made when viewed from more objectively. Only in the 1980s was Lyuban Kamen allowed to work abroad, in Algeria and Morocco. In the 1950s, Lyuban Kamen Rousseff began receiving regularly parcels from his father in Brazil secretly containing US dollar banknotes. He and his wife had no children. Lyuban Kamen died in 2008, and his wife passed away in early 2010. His dream was to visit the carnival in Rio de Janeiro. He was a modest man who did not like to brag. I am sure that he was proud of his sister, explains Rumen Stoyanov, a longtime Bulgarian diplomat in Brazil, a professor of Latin American studies at Sofia University, and an acquaintance of Dilma Rousseff, her mother, and her Bulgarian half-brother. In 2006, he helped deliver a four-digit sum in euro to Lyuban Kamen that Dilma sent to her ailing brother without having been asked for it. According to Stoyanov, Dilma learned about the bad health of her brother that she had never seen from the Bulgarian consul in Brazil, Joao Vaz, whom he took to Lyuban Kamen's home at his request. Stoyanov believes this was an incredible gesture of Dilma's part. Dilma's other living Bulgarian relatives include a number of first and more distant cousins. But people around the world should be aware of one fact: Dilma's Bulgarian relatives, today and in the past, include some of Bulgaria's most prominent writers, lawyers, journalists, and even a couple of politicians, of both rightist and leftist orientation, a testimony to the fact that her father was not just anybody. Petr Rousseff's birthhouse in Gabrovo is no longer standing, with a parking lot occupying its place. Nonetheless, Gabrovo, a city of 80,000, is totally excited about Dilma's rise to the presidency in Brazil. In these times of crisis, it is very important that we seek occasions to take pride in, cheer up and find inspiration to change the world around us. Dilma Rousseff's victory in the presidential race is such an occasion, Gabrovo Mayor Nikolai Surakova said, as the people of Gabrovo started taking pride in the fact that a person descended from their town became president of Brazil. What kind of person is Dilma Rousseff? While Dilma has been Lula's hand-picked favorite, analysts have indicated what they see as a rather substantial difference in their characters. Dilma Rousseff has a more quieter and reserved temperament, and she is not known as a person that will go out like President Lula. She is not a people's person, but she will now occupy a position as president of an emerging power that will require her to show she is capable. She has very big shoes to fill, comments Professor Sotero, comparing Dilma and her sponsor, outgoing President Lula. As in theater, Dilma's victory will be a signal enter Dilma at the beginning of 2011. The question is, will it also mean exit Lula? Brazilian history shows that the level of loyalty between the creator and its political creature tend to diminish at the first sign of a crisis. To compare with Russia, Dilma will not be Lula's Medvedev. Brazilian democratic institutions are much stronger than those in Russia, explains political analyst Navis. I think that no other politician will be as popular as Lula in Brazil, at least not in the short term. Even if President Dilma, we usually call people by their first names in Brazil, even in more formal occasions, can make a technically perfect government, I think she will never manage to match Lula's approval rates. His background is a true fairy tale story, a poor blue-collar worker who made it to the big stage and became president of a big country. Besides, he is by far more charismatic than her and has a more popular approach with people, Brazilian journalist Pedro Bassin states. Probably enchanted with her Bulgarianness, Those Bulgarians who have been in touch with Dilma see her as explicitly sociable and welcoming person. Dilma is a person who is a technocrat in the best sense of this term. She is a cordial person, as are most Brazilians, who easily communicates with people, and does not play the demagogue. She names things the way they are, Professor Stoyanov says. Another Bulgarian, who has been in contact with Dilma, journalist Momchil Inzhov, who made the first ever interview with her for a Bulgarian media in 2004, and then another one in 2010, backs his words. She said this explicitly, that Brazil will not be changing Lula's way, and Brazil will be going on with Lula's way. And this is enough. But let's not forget that she is a woman. This is a big change. There have already been other women presidents in Latin America, but she is the first in Brazil. The Brazilians respect her very much. Let's not forget her past. After all, she fought against the military junta. She went to jail, and was tortured by the military dictatorship. But Dilma Rousseff definitely has the ability to charm people. I was present at her rally in Porto Alegre, after which I managed to interview her. The people were enchanted by her. She enjoys their respect. The favelas are filled with Dilma's posters and banners, for example. But Dilma is getting mass support indeed, from all classes, Inzhov concludes. Leading the rising Brazilian colossus. It is a common opinion nowadays that Brazil is an emerging economic powerhouse, with the 8 years of President Lula witnessing the gist of its growth. The great expectations for his successor Dilma Rousseff, and probably the reason he selected and promoted her, are for her to stay the course. In her election night speech as well as in her first address as president to the Brazilian Congress, Rousseff has made clear her intention to work to eradicate poverty in Brazil. She declared fighting poverty and promotion of Brazil's economic development her fundamental commitment. In the short term, we will not have the pull of developed economies to boost our growth. For that reason, our own policies, our own market, our own savings and our own economic decisions become even more important, Rousseff said, as cited by DPA, when it became clear she nailed the presidency. She did pledge to remain firm on the course of her promoter, outgoing President Inácio Lula. At the same time, as she formally took over, it became clear that she is now facing even tougher new challenges, for example, with respect to trade, defense and currency issues in relations with China, Brazil's largest trading partner. There are two major challenges for Brazil today. One has to do with the improvement of the physical capital and infrastructure of the country, airports, ports, highways, railways. The other equally or even more important issue is the human capital problem, believes Professor Sotero. But internationally she will have challenges as well. For example, Lula is a leader very well known in the region, he is an international star. Dilma is not. Her inclination will probably be to have a quieter kind of foreign policy, less visible, less protagonistic, as we say in Brazil, which will be probably more in line with the Brazilian temperament. He emphasizes Brazil's rising international responsibilities given the fact that the Brazilian economy is approximately 60% of South America's economy, and over 40% of the Latin American economy, which creates expectations for Brazil on part of the neighbors. I believe that Dilma Rousseff, having had dealings as chief of staff with the USA and Europe, etc., probably will look for a balanced interaction to really emphasize the fact that Brazil is a global nation, our trade is more or less evenly distributed with the different regions of the world, and Brazil obviously has to act very carefully, Sotero says. Brazil should have a very strong competitive advantage, energy. The energy substitution and sustainability are clearly two factors that will be very dynamic in the world in the next few years, stressed Urani. Bulgarian journalist Momchil Inzhov has indicated the impressive growth of the middle class in Brazil. Despite the recent developments, there is still rampant poverty across Brazil, especially the northeast. Each city has its own favelas, or slums. But still, the unique thing about Brazil has been the growth of the middle class, a development little known elsewhere in Latin America. It will be business as usual in terms of foreign policy. Emerging powers coalition will be one of the main foreign policy strategies. But the lack of popularity and charisma may also hinder this strategy. If Brazil maintains a foreign policy more distant to Western democracies when it comes to human rights, climate change etc., it will be hard to deal with pressure and criticisms. Lula had enough strength to fend off criticism. Dilma may not have that. But, then again, the Brazilian Foreign Ministry may adjust the rhetoric a little bit, to avoid taking too much risks, political analyst Navis says. Bulgaria and Brazil, two countries with Bulgarian presidents. The most interesting question for Bulgarians, now that one of their kin has been elected to lead one of the rising global powers, is how that will reflect on Bulgaria. The two nations have had little interaction despite mutual friendly declarations. Bulgaria has been diagnosed with a Dilma fever. There have been hopes it can now become Brazil's EU door. Can her Bulgarian origins make the two countries really close? Dilma has occasionally talked about Bulgaria as the home country of her father with respect and affection. I believe that as president she will be interested in Bulgaria because there is this historic tie, points out Professor Sotero. I think that Dilma's probable victory will draw more attention to the fact that she will be the first woman president than anything else. A reminder that Brazil had a very popular president with a Czech last name, Kubitschek, in the 1950s. But undoubtedly it will make Brazilians more curious about her family's origins in Bulgaria and probably inspire books and more studies on the subject, predicts analyst Navis. I remember that Dilma Rousseff explicitly told me, quote unquote, I am half Bulgarian. This is no surprise for an immigrant society such as Brazil. Her election will be good for both Brazil and Bulgaria, and since Brazil is a country with peaceful foreign policy, it will also be useful for the international community, says diplomat Rumen Stoyanov. Feelings of tenderness and love, is what Dilma Rousseff told journalist Momchil Insho from the 24 Chesa daily she has for Bulgaria. I have to say that to some extent I feel Bulgarian even though I never came to my father's homeland. I assume to be the only Bulgarian, in inverted commas of course, who has achieved success outside Bulgaria, Dilma Rousseff told Brazilian TV channel Globo. It would be a very moving experience for me to be welcomed in Bulgaria as Brazil's president because this is a small country. Just imagine how they look at Brazil, she added. Inshove explains that Dilma is well-intentioned towards Bulgaria, all the more so given the fact that she owes her upbringing and education to her Bulgarian father. Dilma herself says about her father, I don't remember my father without a book. He read really a lot, he always had a book in hand. So she got this love for reading and knowledge from her Bulgarian father. She does have feelings for Bulgaria, she has been dreaming of visiting Bulgaria, something she told me in our first interview in 2004. Unfortunately, she did not manage to come and meet her brother while he was still alive, he says. Brazil and Eastern Europe were in opposite camps during the Cold War. I think that Dilma Rousseff helped to promote not only Bulgaria, but the surrounding countries too, a very remote place for the average Brazilian, at least from my generation. Now, many Brazilians know where Gabrovo is. And that is not a joke. Says journalist Bassin, suggesting that Brazilians have a bit of a Bulgaria fever, too. Whether Bulgarians and Brazilians will start to be more aware of one another, and whether their countries will have economic and cultural exchange worthy of the name remains unclear, but Dilma Rousseff herself has made a goodwill gesture towards Bulgaria even before she took over, by breaking the protocol and receiving the Bulgarian state delegation for her inauguration 2 days before that, on December 30, 2010. The entire episode led Bulgarian Prime Minister Boyko Borisov to remark with his typical mischievous grin that the entire world now envies Bulgaria for its special relationship with the new president of Brazil. With all due respect to US President Barack Obama, but should both he and Dilma Rousseff visit Bulgaria in the months and years to come, Dilma will probably receive an even more excited welcome in Sofia than he will. From Dilma fever to Dilma pride in Bulgaria. The most important question that comes to mind here is, do Bulgarians have the right to be proud of Dilma Rousseff? Being a small nation, many Bulgarians have always been proud of the achievements of Bulgarians or people of Bulgarian origin, such as the inventor of the modern-day computer John Atanisov, accomplished abroad or with little actual direct connection to the Bulgarian state. This is precisely the reason other Bulgarians have been critical of their own nation for this kind of pride. Well, at least I don't think we have any grounds to be ashamed of that, to put it this way, says Inzhov when asked if Bulgaria's pride in Dilma Rousseff is justified. I think that we have every right to be proud with the Bulgarian origin of Dilma Rousseff because this does not in any way affect her Brazilian nationality. May God allow, one day, the way we have a monument of John Atanisov in downtown Sofia, that we also have a monument of Dilma Rousseff, states Professor Stoyanov. Anyone with at least some brains would hate the empty fakely patriotic rhetoric that goes to suggest that everything and everyone important in the world comes from Bulgaria. What Bulgarians should do with respect to Dilma Rousseff's story is first take a good notice of it, because it is truly amazing, all the way from 19th century Gabrovo to the 21st century presidency of Brazil. Second, they should make sense of it by expanding their horizons in the world and put some hard work into doing their homework as far as trade, diplomacy, and cultural ties are concerned. The first sign of that happening, as far as Brazil is concerned, was actually not related to Dilma. In June 2010, Bulgaria was visited by Brazil's foreign minister for the first time ever, back then Lula's top diplomat Celso Amorim, a visit that will be remembered with a joint declaration on the ties between the Balkans and Latin America and statement of Bulgarian support for a permanent seat for Brazil on the UN Security Council. Unlike most of the 20th century, today Bulgaria and Brazil are in the same camp, both are Western-style liberal democracies. While Brazil is also a BRIC country and a representative of the Global South, its importance for the USA and the EU, of which Bulgaria is a part, is only set to grow. Interestingly, even with so much having already happened in Dilma's life, the most challenging moments for her are still ahead. The amazing history of her family and her own life appear to have been a true success story to date, for both Brazil and Bulgaria. It remains to be seen how it will be remembered after her time as president of Brazil and a revered symbol in Bulgaria. Thank you for watching this video.